The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles over open land during the early hours, but a heavy and uneasy quiet that made the air feel tense. Snow stretched across the pastures in long white sheets, untouched except for the deep tracks left by the storm during the night. The sky was still gray, holding the last traces of winter wind, and the cold settled against his coat as he walked the fence line. He had gone out early, long before sunrise, only because something had woken him, a strange feeling he couldn't shake. It was the kind of instinct that came from years of working the land and caring for animals, the kind that whispered when something wasn't right. He kept moving, boots crunching through the fresh snow, and tried to remind himself that the storm had been harsh enough to rattle anyone, but the feeling stayed. He paused, letting his breath form small clouds in the cold air, and listened again. There was nothing. No cattle, no birds, no distant echo from the neighbor's ranch. Just a thick stillness hanging over everything. He turned toward the far end of his property, the part that brushed against the tree line. That was when he heard it. A faint sound cutting through the quiet, soft at first, as if the snow swallowed part of it. A gentle cry, thin and trembling. He frowned, unsure if he had imagined it. Then it came again, clearer this time. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a coyote. It was something else. Something that carried both fear and exhaustion. He gripped the fence and leaned forward, scanning the white field until his eyes caught a dark shape far out near the ridge. It barely moved, just enough to let him know it was alive. His heart thudded harder. Most animals took shelter before a storm. Only something hurt or lost would be stuck out there alone in the cold. He didn't waste time. He headed back to the barn, grabbed a rope, a blanket, and a lantern, and began making his way toward the ridge. The wind pushed against him, sharp and cold, but he kept going. Every few steps he heard that soft cry again. It was the kind of sound that reached deep inside a person, the kind that made it impossible to turn back. He didn't understand why, but he felt drawn to it in a way he couldn't explain. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A horse, thin, shivering, covered in snow that clung to its coat like ice. It stood with its head low, legs trembling as if they could give out at any moment. He slowed his steps, not wanting to scare it, and raised the lantern to see better. That was when the truth hit him in a quiet wave. The horse wasn't just cold and weak. It was blind, its eyes were clouded, pale and unfocused. It didn't look at him. It only tilted its head slightly when he stepped near, reacting to his presence through sound rather than sight. The scene made his throat tighten. A blind horse stranded in the snow didn't happen by accident. Someone had either abandoned it or it had wandered far from home, lost in the storm with no way to protect itself. He spoke softly, keeping his voice low and gentle. The horse flinched at first, then slowly relaxed, as if the tone eased its fear. He moved closer inch by inch, giving the horse time to trust him. When he finally reached it, he touched its neck, feeling how cold and thin it was. The poor thing had been out here too long. He wrapped the blanket over the horse's back and adjusted it so the warmth settled around its shoulders. The animal let out a shaky breath, leaning into the touch like it had been waiting for help. He tied the rope loosely around its neck, speaking comforting words as he did. The horse didn't resist. It only stood there, fragile and silent, as if it had finally found a moment of safety. The snow crunched behind him when he stepped away to guide the horse forward. The horse hesitated, lifting one hoof at a time in cautious steps. It walked slowly, trusting the sound of his voice to lead the way. Every few feet it stopped to steady itself, and he waited patiently, knowing each step mattered. As they moved across the field, he kept wondering how long the horse had been wandering alone. Had someone dumped it out here, thinking it wouldn't survive the storm? Had it escaped from somewhere even farther, fighting its way through the cold until it couldn't go any farther? These questions stirred the first traces of anger and confusion in him. Blind animals didn't just appear in the middle of winter storms. Something wasn't adding up. By the time they reached the barn, the horse was nearly stumbling. He led it inside, grateful for the warmth trapped within the wooden walls. The lantern light filled the space, casting soft shadows along the hay bales and stalls. He guided the horse into the nearest stall and closed the gate gently. The horse lowered its head, breathing heavily as if relieved to be somewhere safe at last. He grabbed a brush, some warm water, and feed, then returned to the stall. He worked quietly, brushing the snow from the horse's coat and drying it with slow strokes. As the horse relaxed, he studied it more closely. Its ribs showed faintly beneath its coat, its hooves were worn, cracked in some places. Its mane was tangled, but not beyond repair. This was a horse that had once been cared for. Someone had owned it. Someone had fed it, someone had raised it, which made the situation even more unsettling. Why was it alone now? When he offered the warm water, the horse drank with deep, grateful gulps. He let it, watching its body slowly settle as warmth spread through it. He fed it small amounts of hay, knowing too much at once could overwhelm an animal that had gone hungry for so long. Once the horse finally rested, he stepped out of the stall and leaned on the doorway. Snow still fell outside in soft flurries, brushing against the barn door. He stared at the horse, his thoughts tangled. There was something different about this animal, something that didn't make sense. Blind horses rarely survived long on their own, yet somehow this one had made it all the way to his land. Somehow it endured the storm. Somehow it had found its way to the ridge where he heard its cry. He ran a hand over his face, still trying to settle the uneasy feeling in his chest. He knew animals. He knew the land. He trusted his instincts. Something strange had brought this horse here, something he didn't understand yet. He reached for the lantern and turned toward the door, planning to gather more blankets and supplies. But before he could take a step, the horse lifted its head suddenly, ears pointed, as if sensing something outside that he couldn't hear. Its body stiffened, hooves shifting in faint unease. He froze, lantern flickering in his grip. He listened. The barn felt too quiet. The wind had stopped. Even the snowflakes seemed to fall softer. Then he heard it. A distant crunch of snow, slow, heavy, purposeful, not an animal, not the wind, something else. Something or someone moving across the field toward his barn. The horse let out a low breath, tense and uncertain. He tightened his grip on the lantern, his pulse beating harder as he turned toward the barn doors. Whoever was out there had come through the storm for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it wasn't anything he could guess yet. He stepped forward slowly, the quiet around him thick with rising tension, knowing this strange night was only beginning. He stood still with the lantern held close, waiting for the sound to come again. The barn felt warmer compared to the icy world outside, but the tension that filled the air made him feel colder than before. The blind horse shifted behind him, its breath rising in soft clouds, hooves moving in small, uneasy steps as if it sensed trouble. Animals had instincts sharper than any person, and the way the horse reacted told him something wasn't right. He moved toward the barn doors, each step slow and careful. The snow outside glowed faintly under the muted sky, and he pressed one ear to the wooden boards, listening. The crunching sound came again, not rushed. Not stumbling, steady, measured, someone walking with a purpose. He felt a chill work its way down his back, not from the cold, but from the unknown. His land was far from town. Folks didn't wander around here, especially not in the middle of a harsh winter morning. Whoever was out there either had a reason to come or had been watching for a while. Neither thought made him feel any better. He eased the door open just enough to peer out. The lantern's glow stretched across the yard, catching snowflakes drifting silently. At first he saw nothing. Just white ground, dark sky, and the silhouette of the fence line. But then a figure stepped into the faint light, shoulders hunched beneath a heavy coat, face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. The man walked slowly, each foot sinking deep into the snow. He didn't raise a hand or call out, just kept coming closer. The farmer stood still, gripping the lantern tight until he reminded himself to breathe. When the man was finally close enough for the light to reach his face, the farmer saw that he wasn't young, though he didn't look too old either. His eyes were narrowed from the cold, and his beard was dusted with frost. He didn't look dangerous at first glance, but something in his expression felt guarded, like he was carrying more than he wanted to say. The stranger stopped a few feet from the barn door and nodded once. "Morning," he said in a quiet voice. The farmer hesitated before answering, his tone measured. "You're out early for this weather?" The man's gaze drifted past him, toward the barn interior, as if he already knew what was inside. "I'm looking for a horse," he said. "Might have wandered off last night during the storm." The words struck hard, but the farmer didn't show it. He leaned slightly against the door, blocking the view inside. "What kind of horse?" The man's jaw tightened. "A bay, thin, blind?" The farmer felt the horse behind him shift again, hearing the stranger's voice. He didn't turn his head, but he could sense its fear rising. He wondered what kind of life the horse had lived before stumbling through the storm. Whatever it had endured, whatever had brought it here, it hadn't been good. He steadied his breath and asked, "How'd you lose it?" The man looked away for a moment. Hard to say, storm came in fast. "Animals got spooked, some broke loose. Been hunting tracks all morning." The farmer studied him. Something in the man's voice didn't match his story. He spoke like someone covering holes, someone avoiding too much detail. Out here, folks usually gave straight answers, but this man danced around them. The farmer stepped outside, keeping the barn door close behind him. "Tracks would have been buried by now," he said. "Storm covered everything overnight." The stranger shrugged. "Some signs still hold." He looked at the snow-covered ridge. "I followed what I could. All of it led this way." The wind picked up slightly, brushing snow against their boots. The farmer didn't respond right away. He couldn't deny that the horse was here, but he also couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling twisting inside him. The blind horse had been terrified, starving, worn down. No animal could take that kind of condition if someone had been caring for it properly. The stranger took a small step closer. "If you've seen the horse, I'd appreciate you telling me." The farmer kept his posture steady. "Haven't seen anything yet. But if an animal's wandering out here half frozen, I'll keep an eye out." The man looked disappointed, but not surprised. He adjusted his coat collar and said, "If you find it, let me know. With winter this rough, the poor thing won't last long." The farmer nodded, but didn't say more. He watched as the man walked back toward the ridge, his figure slowly fading into the storm-colored distance. Only when he vanished behind the tree line did the farmer step back inside the barn and close the door. The blind horse lifted its head, ears flicking anxiously. He set the lantern down and rested a hand on the stall door. "I don't know who that was," he murmured quietly, "but something's not right." The horse let out a faint, shaky breath. It stood close to the corner of the stall, not in fear, but as if trying to make sense of the voice it had heard outside. The farmer brushed its neck again, trying to calm both the horse and himself. He stepped back and leaned against the barn wall. The question circling in his mind felt heavier now. Why would a blind horse be out in the storm? Why was it so thin? Why had the stranger searched with such urgency but offered so little truth? None of it fit together cleanly. The only thing he knew for certain was that the horse didn't want to return to whoever had left it behind. As daylight slowly brightened the barn windows, he checked the horse again. It had begun to settle, now chewing gently at the hay he offered. Its ears twitched at every sound. Snow melting on the roof, wind rushing past the cracks in the wood, his footsteps moving around the stall. It reacted to everything, relying entirely on sound to understand its world. He knelt down to examine its hooves, noticing marks around its ankles where an old rope had rubbed the skin raw. The sight tightened his chest. This wasn't an animal that had wandered freely. It had been tied somewhere, probably for a long time. The more he looked, the more the truth showed itself. This horse had suffered. He rose to his feet, anger and sympathy mixing inside him. Whoever claimed this horse as theirs hadn't protected it. They hadn't fed it well. They hadn't sheltered it during the storm. They hadn't treated it with care or respect. And that stranger's voice, quiet and peculiar, told him that returning the horse wouldn't be the safe choice. He tossed fresh hay into the stall and placed another bucket of warm water down. The horse nudged his arm gently, almost like gratitude. He didn't know how a blind animal could already show trust, despite whatever it had faced, but it did. And that trust pulled him in deeper. He walked to the barn door again and peeked outside. The snow had started falling heavier, erasing any footprints the stranger had left. With the storm covering the trail, the man wouldn't be back quickly. But it didn't change the feeling settling deeper into the farmer's gut. The blind horse wasn't lost. It was running from something. Or someone? He closed the door firmly and took a long breath. He wasn't sure why he felt so responsible already. Maybe it was the way the horse leaned toward him instead of away. Maybe it was the thought of what would happen if the stranger got hold of it again. Maybe it was the simple fact that the horse had walked through a storm and survived long enough to find him. Whatever the reason, he knew one thing. The story wasn't ending here. The storm had brought more than snow to his land. It had brought a mystery he couldn't ignore. A blind horse with a past, a stranger with secrets, a trail of unanswered questions buried under winter's weight. And somewhere out in the cold, something else was waiting for him to discover it. The wind picked up as the day dragged on, rolling low across the snow-packed fields and rattling the thin windows at the front of the farmhouse. Inside, the farmer paced slowly from the stove to the door and back again, listening for any new sound from the barn. He had brought the blind horse in just before dawn, and even now he could not shake the feeling that the animal carried more than what he had seen in the storm. The rescue itself felt like only the beginning of something bigger, something he had stepped into without meaning to. Every time he replayed that moment when the horse stumbled into his lantern light, he felt the same tight pull in his chest. It was not only worry. It was curiosity mixed with a strange sense of responsibility. He kept checking through the frosted window, watching for anyone who might have been tracking the horse or searching for it. No one had passed down the long road all morning. That road rarely saw travelers except for supply wagons or neighbors making winter rounds. Yet the blind horse had been too well kept and too calm to be a wild stray. It carried an air of gentleness that hinted at careful handling. Someone had owned it, and someone must have cared for it. What troubled the farmer more was how such a horse had ended up stranded in the snow with no tracks leading out of the woods behind it. The cold morning had erased most signs, but even in the gray light he had noticed something off. The horse had come forward as if waiting for him, not like an animal running from danger. Throughout the day he made sure the horse had fresh hay and water warmed just enough to keep from freezing. He noticed the way the horse turned its ears toward every movement, listening with a focus that felt almost human. Its blindness did not weaken its presence. If anything, it made the horse seem more alert, more connected to the world through touch and sound. When the farmer brushed the snow and dirt from its coat, he found marks along the neck that looked like the remains of an old harness or halter. These marks were too deep to be accidental. They spoke of long travel or long work. He wondered if the horse had been part of a wagon team, or if it had belonged to someone who depended on it every day. Later, as the sun dipped low, the farmer found himself thinking about stories he had heard when he was younger. Tales of horses that wandered landscapes carrying secrets or leading people toward things they needed to know. In those stories, the animals always appeared during storms or at dusk. They arrived right at the moment someone felt lost or unsure. As he fed the stove and warmed the barn again, he shook off the thought, telling himself it was just the cold making him drift back into old tales. Yet something in the horse's calm breath made him hesitate before turning away. He spent part of the afternoon searching through old notes and maps in a drawer near the kitchen table. There had been trouble in the region a few winters back when livestock went missing from isolated farms. Some animals were never found. Others turned up in odd places, far from where they had last been seen. The sheriff had blamed wild predators, but the tracks never matched and the missing animals were always horses, mules, or oxen, never sheep or cattle. People spoke quietly about it, but no one ever landed on a clear answer. Now, as he looked at the blind horse resting in the barn, he wondered whether there was a connection. The snow outside thickened as the hours passed. A few times the wind grew sharp enough that it rattled the old barn doors and sent shivers up the farmer's arms. He grabbed his coat and moved toward the barn again, feeling uneasy with the storm deepening. When he stepped inside, the horse lifted its head right away as if it had sensed him long before the door opened. He placed his hand gently on its neck, reassuring it. But something about its stillness made him pause. The horse wasn't resting. It was listening. He followed the direction of its ears and felt the faintest tremor in the ground. At first he thought it was only the wind, but then he felt it again. A soft vibration that didn't match the rhythm of the storm. He walked to the barn wall and listened. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the tree line, there was a sound carried through the snow. It was far away but steady, like hooves or wheels turning slowly over frozen ground. The horse shifted in its stall, stepping back as if pulling away from that distant sound. Not in fear, but in recognition. The farmer's breath caught as he began to piece things together. Whoever had owned this horse might not have lost it by accident. Something might have driven the horse away. Or maybe the horse had escaped from something it no longer trusted. He returned to the house and put more wood in the stove, though he kept glancing toward the barn door. There was something he felt he needed to understand before the night grew too deep. He grabbed his coat again and made his way toward the old shed where he kept his tools. From a corner shelf he took a lantern he rarely used. He lit it carefully and let the glow settle before walking back outside. The light cast long shadows across the snow, shadows that stretched toward the woods where he thought the sound had come from. His boots crunched over the frozen ground as he moved closer to the edge of the trees. He stopped when he saw something that made him tighten his grip on the lantern. There were tracks heading toward his property. Faint, almost wiped out by the new snow, but still visible. They looked like hoofprints mixed with marks from a sled or wagon. The farmer crouched down and examined them more closely. Whoever had passed through had been traveling slow, likely because of the storm. The prints looked uneven, as if empty weight pulled the sled instead of loaded cargo. He looked back at his barn, then at the tracks again. A thought formed in his mind, one that unsettled him even more. What if the blind horse had once been tied to that sled, then at some point something had caused it to break away? He felt that same quiet pull he had felt when he first found the horse. It was not fear. It was understanding mixed with an urge to protect. He returned to the barn and stood near the horse again. He could almost sense that the horse was waiting for him to figure something out. The tension in the air reminded him of the old frontier stories where strange events pushed people to uncover truths they had long ignored. The horse lowered its head, pressing gently against his shoulder, and he felt a sense of trust in that small gesture. He whispered softly to the animal, promising he would not let anything harm it. But deep down, he knew the real challenge was only beginning. The tracks outside told him that whatever had brought the horse to him might still be near. The steady sound he had heard earlier might return, and the truth behind the horse's blindness and its desperate journey through. The storm was tied to something larger than a simple rescue. He stepped out of the barn and faced the dark woods again. The wind slowed for a moment, quiet enough that he could hear his own breath. The unease that had been building all day hardened into a clear warning. This wasn't just a lost animal. This was the start of a turning point in his quiet winter life. Something had brought that blind horse straight to him, guided by instinct or fate or something he could not yet name. And whatever had driven it into the storm had not given up. The night settled thick around the farm, and the storm pressed against the windows with a force that made each gust feel like a warning. The farmer stayed near the barn door longer than he meant to, listening for any change in the wind or the faint sound he had heard earlier. Nothing came, yet the tension stayed with him. The blind horse shifted inside the stall, pacing a few steps before stopping and lifting its head again. It acted like it expected something to happen, like it sensed a presence far out in the dark. The farmer felt it too. The stillness around him was too sharp, too watchful for a normal winter night. He checked the blankets on the horse one more time, making sure its coat was dry and warm. The animal leaned into his touch in a way that told him it trusted him, even though they had only known each other for a short while. He rubbed its shoulder gently and whispered calming words, but the horse's breath came quicker than before, and its ears kept turning back toward the woods. The farmer wondered again whether whoever had owned this horse was close by. He wondered whether the tracks he had seen were old or new. Something inside him felt certain that whoever had passed through had a reason to travel so close to his land, and that reason was tied to the horse now resting in his barn. He left the barn again and walked to the edge of his porch. Snowflakes drifted slower now, but the sky carried a weight that made the night feel unsettled. He lifted the lantern and scanned the road and fields once more. Nothing moved out there, not even a rabbit or wandering bird. The silence made the land feel abandoned, except for the faint glow from his barn windows. He could sense that the farm felt different now, like the blind horse had brought with it some kind of quiet shift. As he walked back inside, the farmer's mind drifted to the stories he had heard in old towns and gatherings. Stories about animals who guided people through dangers or animals who broke free from the hands of those who used them without kindness. In some tales, a blind horse was seen as a sign, sometimes a warning and sometimes a strange blessing. He thought about the marks on the horse's neck, deep and old, and the way the horse recoiled from the sound in the distance earlier. Whatever had happened, it had shaped the horse in ways the farmer could not yet understand. He poured himself a cup of warm tea and sat near the window, watching the barn from afar. He felt protective over the animal, more than he expected to feel. It wasn't just sympathy anymore. It was something stronger, like the horse had arrived at the exact moment his quiet life needed a purpose. He had lived alone on this farm for years, spending winters in solitude with nothing but simple routines to carry the days. But now he found himself listening to every sound, watching every shadow, feeling more alert than he had been in a long time. As the night stretched on, he caught that strange vibration again, faint under the wind. He froze and tilted his head to listen. The vibration came in a slow, steady rhythm, almost like hooves against packed snow. He placed the cup down and stepped outside without grabbing his coat. The cold bit at his arms instantly, but he ignored it. He followed the sound until he reached the fence line. The vibration grew clearer, then stopped. He looked into the woods, but the trees stood like silent figures and revealed nothing. When he stepped back toward the barn, he felt the horse's unease before he even opened the door. The animal shifted rapidly, bumping against the stall wall, its breath loud and quick. He rushed toward it and laid a hand on its neck. Its muscles were tensed, as if preparing for something. He stroked its coat gently, and the horse slowly calmed, though its ears still faced the woods. The farmer whispered softly, promising safety again, though he wasn't sure how much control he actually had over what was coming. The next morning the air felt heavier than any winter day he could remember. The storm clouds still hung low, but the snow had paused. He stepped out early, checking the area near the barn, then the trees again. It didn't take long before he found new tracks, clearer than the ones before because no fresh snow had fallen to hide them. These prints were more defined, and the marks beside them looked like a sled or wagon that had passed with purpose. The farmer felt a cold rush in his stomach as he traced the pattern with his eyes. Whoever was out there had returned and was moving closer to his property. He followed the trail slowly, his boots pressing deep into the snow. As he reached the thicker part of the woods, he stopped. Ahead, the tracks turned toward a narrow path that led deeper into the forest, a place he rarely visited except to gather fallen branches. He stared at the path and felt torn. He wanted to find out who was traveling through his land, yet he knew leaving the horse alone felt wrong. The tension pulled at him from both sides. He turned back toward the barn, walking quicker than before. Once inside, the horse lifted its head immediately and moved toward him, almost as if it were asking him what he had found. He stood there a moment, taking in the way the horse seemed to understand more than a normal animal would. Something in the horse's posture spoke of survival. Something in its calm eyes, though blind, held a depth he couldn't quite name. The day passed slowly with a strange stillness that never lifted. Several times the farmer thought he heard distant sounds, but each time he stepped outside, the world looked deserted. He fed the horse, repaired a loose latch on the barn door, and tried to distract himself with small chores. But the tension kept building, rising with every hour. He knew the person or group behind those tracks would return. He just didn't know when or what they wanted. And the idea that they might come for the horse made him feel protective in a way he hadn't felt in years. Late in the afternoon, when the sky was turning a pale shade of gray, the farm dogs began barking. Their sharp voices broke the quiet and echoed across the fields. The farmer rushed outside, grabbing his coat only because instinct told him to. The dogs stood near the edge of the fence, growling low with their tails stiff. He followed their stare and saw something moving slowly along the tree line, a dark shape, then another, then a third. His breath caught. The figures weren't animals. They were silhouettes of people walking through the snow, moving with deliberate steps toward his property. The farmer felt a jolt of alarm, but also a strange clarity. These were the individuals who had left the tracks. These were the ones who had passed through the night before, and now they were heading straight for the barn. He hurried back inside and closed the gate as quietly as he could. He moved toward the barn in long, quick strides, feeling the cold air tighten around his throat. Inside, the horse sensed him instantly, turning its head and pressing forward as if urging him to act. He placed his hands on its neck and whispered softly, trying to reassure both himself and the animal. He could feel the tension gathering, the approaching moment when everything would shift. The barn fell silent except for the sound of the horse's breath. The farmer listened closely. Soft crunching steps approached from outside, slow but steady. The shadows of the figures stretched across the snow, reaching toward the barn door. He stepped back from the stall, his heart heavy with worry yet strangely hopeful. Something told him that this encounter, whatever it was going to be, would lead to answers he had been waiting for without knowing it. He knew the moment was building toward something important, something that would decide the fate of the blind horse and his peaceful winter life. The quiet tension filled every corner of the barn, holding everything in place as the footsteps neared the door. And just as the shadows reached the wooden threshold, the farmer took a breath, steadying himself for whatever was about to unfold. The barn door opened slowly, and the farmer stood firm even though his heart raced. The figures stepped inside one by one, brushing snow from their coats as the lantern light revealed their faces. They were not hostile, not armed, just weary travelers with strained expressions. The oldest among them, a man with a gray beard and tired eyes, lifted his hands slightly in a gesture that showed he meant no harm. The farmer waited without speaking, letting the cold air settle around them until the man finally stepped forward. The man explained that he and the others had been searching for the blind horse for days. They had traveled through the storm, following the faint trail the horse had left behind after breaking free from their camp. The farmer felt the horse shift behind him, turning its head toward the sound of the visitors. The weary man paused, looking at the animal with a mixture of regret and longing. Something in his expression softened, but it also carried a quiet guilt that the farmer didn't fully understand yet. When the traveler spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. He told the farmer that the horse had been with their family for many years. It had once been strong and fast, the leader of their small herd, but age and hardship had taken its eyesight. Instead of letting it go, they kept it safe and gave it the best care they could, but winter had been brutal on them. Supplies had run low, and they were forced to move farther than they intended in search of food. In the chaos of the storm, the blind horse became frightened and slipped from its lead rope, vanishing into the night. The man said they feared the worst until they found faint signs that the horse was still moving. They followed its trail desperately, hoping it had reached shelter. When he finished his story, he lowered his head as if expecting judgment. The farmer listened carefully, feeling the tension that had held him so tightly begin to loosen. The truth was simpler and kinder than he imagined. There was no threat, no mystery with dark intentions, just people trying to survive a winter that had been unkind to them. The farmer stepped aside so the man could get closer to the horse. When the traveler called the animal's name, the horse lifted its head high and answered with a soft whinny, the first true spark of excitement the farmer had seen from it. The horse moved forward, nudging the man's shoulder gently, showing clear recognition. The man's eyes filled with relief as he stroked the horse's neck. It was clear the bond between them ran deep. Still, the farmer sensed something unspoken lingering in the man's silence. After a long pause, the traveler admitted that although they loved the horse, they feared they could not take it back with them. Their resources were too thin, their shelter too weak, and they were traveling toward a long stretch of land with no safe resting place for an animal that couldn't see. He said they wanted to come back for the horse when things improved, but he knew deep down that the winter ahead would be harsh. They had already lost too much. The horse needed more care than they could provide. The barn felt warm for a long moment as the truth settled between them. The farmer understood now why the horse had seemed torn, fearful, and yet hopeful in some way. It had been caught between the life it once knew and the new world it had stumbled into. The farmer rested his hand on the horse's shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of its calm breath. He looked at the traveler, then at the other two figures standing behind him, their faces lined with worry and exhaustion. He offered to take the horse in permanently if that was truly what they wanted. The man's expression shifted with a mix of sadness and gratitude. He hesitated only because giving up the horse felt like letting go of a piece of his family's past. But after a moment, he nodded. He said the horse had found the right place, a safe place, and the farmer's kindness had already given it something they could not offer during the long winter. The relief on their faces was clear. They thanked the farmer over and over, offering what little they had in return, though he refused anything beyond a simple handshake. They stayed for a while longer, warming their hands by the barn lantern, sharing a few stories about the horse's younger years. The farmer listened closely, smiling at the way the animal had once acted bold and confident, guiding younger horses through mountain trails. It was hard to imagine that the blind, gentle horse before him had once been full of strong energy and eagerness. When it came time for the travelers to leave, the man placed his hand on the horse's face one last time. He spoke softly to it, promising that it would always be remembered. The horse leaned into the touch, calm and accepting. The visitors stepped out into the cold, their figures fading toward the woods as the farmer watched from the doorway. The barn remained quiet until the last sound of their footsteps disappeared into the night. The farmer returned to the horse's side, brushing its coat slowly, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle into something peaceful. He led the horse from the stall and let it stretch its legs in the barn aisle. For the first time, the horse seemed fully relaxed, as if sensing that the uncertainty that had followed it for days had finally eased. The farmer guided it around the barn, speaking softly, letting it memorize the space and learn the structure by touch and sound. Over the next days, the farm took on a different energy. The blind horse grew stronger, its steps steadier and its appetite better. The farmer found himself enjoying the new routine. He repaired the old paddock so the horse could move safely outside during calm weather, and he added layers of straw to the stall to keep it warm through the cold nights. The horse responded with quiet trust, nudging him gently whenever he entered the barn. The farmer also noticed something else. Helping the horse had changed him, giving him renewed purpose and connection. The quiet farm no longer felt like a lonely stretch of land. Having the horse there brought new warmth to his days, and he felt grateful each morning when he heard its steady breath from the stall. As the winter weeks passed, the farm community learned about the rescue. Neighbors would stop by to ask about the blind horse they'd heard was found in the snow. Many offered extra hay or grain, wanting to support the animal's recovery. The kindness spread easily, bringing a comforting sense of unity to the season. People admired the farmer's decision to keep the horse, and they often said that the rescue had reminded them of the value of compassion during hard times. By late winter, the blind horse had grown noticeably stronger. It followed the farmer's voice with ease, walking calmly beside him in the pasture. It recognized the sound of the gate, the rustle of hay, and the soft crunch of the farmer's boots. Though it could not see, it moved with confidence because it trusted where it was and who was guiding it. One morning, when the sun finally broke through the clouds after weeks of dull skies, the farmer stood outside with the horse beside him. The air felt warmer than before, carrying the promise of spring. He placed his hand gently on the horse's neck, feeling its calm strength. He thought back to the night he first found it stranded in the deep snow, cold and shaking, unaware of what future awaited it. That moment felt distant now, replaced by something hopeful and grounded. The horse breathed out, slow and steady, as if sensing the shift in the season. The farmer smiled softly, knowing they had both come through something difficult and found something meaningful on the other side. It wasn't just a rescue story anymore. It was a reminder that even in harsh winters there is room for unexpected bonds and second chances. And with that quiet understanding, the farmer guided the horse forward, ready to welcome the days ahead.